Start by removing the filler neck. You just twist it counterclockwise, pull out, and this cover comes right off. Just set it aside. We need to get access to some of the stuff back here that's underneath it. I like to put the filler neck back, make sure I don't drop any crud down into the engine. Next, we'll get the reservoir out of the way. It's a 10 millimeter for these stamped nuts. You can remove them by hand if you've already done this. Otherwise, it's just a 10 millimeter. You can just slip it on there, get it a little loose, and go by hand. Set those out of the way, keep them. Pull this guy straight up, out, and move them to the front of the engine. You want to disconnect the battery. Some people do the positive post, some others do the negative. I do the positive here on the alternator simply because there's a positive coming off the back of it and it feeds directly into this back to the battery. You can do the negative as well. It disconnects the circuit, but make sure that you do one of these before we go any further. We're going to want to get the belt off. There is a tensioner that is right below it here. See if I can angle. It's this guy right here. He is a 15 millimeter socket. I'm just using a long bar with a 15 millimeter socket that fits right on the nut on the end, and it rotates counterclockwise. You push it to the cab of the vehicle, it will loosen it, and you can see the belt now has slack, and you can just lift it up and off the belt of the alternator, and then slowly release it. It'll go back to its resting position, and you can set the belt underneath the ribs, and now the alternator is free, and we just have to unbolt it. The alternator is held down by 3 15 millimeter bolts. There is one here, there is one here, and there is one right back here underneath this bar. This bar is held on by this 15 millimeter nut on the stud and a 10 millimeter bolt that's back here. So we're going to start by just loosening everything. We'll loosen this guy, and that 10 millimeter. We'll take off this bar, and then we can loosen the last 15 millimeter for the alternator. It is that one right there at my index finger below there. And I've already loosened it, so I can just loosen it some more with my index fingers and thumb. Just comes right out. And now we can see the bar is loose. We can just pick the bar up, remove it, set it aside. Finish taking the rest of these bolts out. Now, I'm going to leave these two in. They're loose, but for now I'm going to leave them in so that I can loosen the charging cable on the back. And this is a 13 millimeter nut. And so we're going to loosen that. Take that guy off really quick. Might have to hold the cable so you don't spin it. Set that aside. Disconnect this cable. This is the cable that I'm talking about that goes to your battery. If you didn't disconnect the battery and this starts touching a bunch of stuff, you might be shorting out your battery or your electronics or doing things you probably don't want to be doing. But now that that's off, you can disconnect the connector here. There's a tab or a locking pin. I don't remember. Mine broke a long time ago, so all I have to do in mine is pull out. But there should be a tab right back here that you just push down and pull out. And we'll finish up with the rest of these bolts here. Then your alternator is free. You can take it out. Go ahead and put the alternator back. Set it right back down where it was. Just kind of line things up a little bit. Remember the long bolt with the stud on top? goes on this post here. And then we got 2 other bolts. The longer one, or the middle of the 3, goes down here on this. And this one goes in the back here. Where is it? Right here. Goes right there. I'm just gonna leave it sit there. I'm gonna get this other one started, since you gotta kind of lift this up, thread it in. Once that's threaded in, oh, it went to the floor. If that sort of stuff happens to you often, like it does me, I suggest investing in a telescopic mirror, I suggest investing in a telescopic magnet. Not only are these tools super handy for getting tools that pieces that you dropped, but you can get in and start bolts in hard to reach places. This bolt here, you obviously can get your fingers on it, but maybe there was stuff around it and you had to like slowly feed it down from the top. You can do that, and then you just kind of slide the magnet off to the side and the bolt's there, and you can get your socket on it and start it. So these magnets have been a lifesaver. Try this again. Get these bolts started here. Reconnect the charging cable. That was the 13mm nut that was on the back side. Let's put that back on. Put the boot back on. Put your plug back on, plug it back in. Alright, we can go ahead and put the belt back on. Loosening the tensioner the same way as before. Throw on the belt up and over. Now if the belt doesn't go on easy, like you can see this just kind of slides on and off, you might have some jump teeth on the belt on one of the other accessories, and you want to check that. It should just slide on. You shouldn't have to fight it. Go ahead and add the support arm again. That was the 10mm small nut that went in the back, or screw, bolt, whatever you want to call it. It's the only one like it. It's one of a kind. And then the 13mm nut, or sorry, 15mm went on top here. You can kind of adjust this a little bit to make it fit well. Seems like there's a lot of slack in it. They don't need to be ridiculously tight. They need to be snug. A word of caution, you probably want to make sure you have this bracket on here though. This is a really long bolt going through here, and there's a lot of torque coming off of the belt on this thing, and what could happen, one of the reasons why I believe there's 2 bolts on this side, is it's kind of wanting to pull this way down, you know, at an angle. And having the bolt back here secures it from this kind of a rotation. And then there's this one that wants to pull it down this way and kind of over because of how it's contacting this wheel. It's contacting it right here, not anywhere else really. It just has a very small window. I mean, like 25, or not 25, about 90-degree contact here, maybe a little more. And so this arm is protecting this bolt on this aluminum case to keep it from snapping, so that if for some reason you put a lot of torque and force on it and this belt goes around really quick, or accelerating, doing whatever, this gets weak, it could just snap off and come flying and, you know, bounce around the engine and do all kinds of damage. I've never heard of that happening, but my suspicion is that's why they added this bar, is so that it just will not happen. That you have a stud here, and in order for this alternator to break off, it not only has to crack the housing of the alternator clean off right here away from the bolt completely all the way down, it also has to break the back bolt, and then this one has to move as well. And so this one is just securing it from rotating this way. These ones are securing it so it doesn't want to come forward and break off. Go ahead and slide the coolant reservoir back down where it was. Put the two stamped nuts on there just to hold it down. These just have to be finger tight. It's really not doing anything structurally important. It's just making sure that this reservoir doesn't hop off these pegs and that it stays where it's at. We'll put the cover back on. If you don't have a cover, skip this step, obviously. Just sits down on there, put the filler neck back on, and you're done.